It's so wonderful to be with you again. My name is Cisco Walker. I'm an evangelist here in the International District. And I have some kind of a different approach to try to take with you today. Today I'm going to be talking about PureFlix, Hallmark movies, and Angel Productions. And one of the reasons that I want to talk about this today is we're going to try to answer the question of why is it so dangerous for Christians to live in an isolated bubble. And it's my opinion, and the opinion of many others as well, many other of my colleagues, when you watch PureFlix all the time, when you watch Angel Productions all of the time, when you watch Hallmark movies all of the time, if you're not careful, you will begin to live out your Christian experience, to live out your faith in a bubble. And this can be very dangerous because, God has not called you and I, i.e. the church, God has not called the church to escape the world. God has not called the church to isolate themselves from the world. God has not called the church just to pretend that sin doesn't exist, just to pretend that darkness doesn't exist. But you'll notice that when you constantly immerse yourself in the PureFlix bubble, in the Angel Productions bubble, in the Hallmark bubble, or if all you do is watch cinematography that is geared towards Christianity, that is written specifically for Christians, if you're not careful, you'll find yourself insulated, you'll find yourself incubated, and you'll find yourself living in a, quote, marshmallow world that isn't the world that everybody else lives in. But God has called us to change this world. Now, you might say, well, what's so bad about PureFlix? What's so bad about watching an inspiring movie? What's so bad about watching a positive movie? What's so bad about watching an uplifting movie or an encouraging movie? A movie that promotes faith, a movie that promotes family, and a movie that promotes good old-fashioned hometown values. Well, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but when you watch it all of the time, then it can become a problem. And if you'll notice something about Christian cinematography, if you'll notice something about PureFlix and Hallmark movies, is they try to create a utopia. They try to paint a world that is perfect. They try to paint a world where nothing horrible ever happens. They try to paint an imaginary world where everyone is rich and everyone is wealthy and everyone is a certain skin color and everyone has a certain amount of education, and there's no lack in this PureFlix bubble because they're trying to create a utopia. But we have to guard our hearts against this because there's a part of all of us. We all want to live in a utopia. We all want things to be perfect all of the time, but that is not just the way the real world works. When you're talking about cinematography, Christian cinematography, PureFlix, we are called, these movies, these productions, they're not inclusive, but they're exclusive. They're not written for everybody to enjoy. They're geared toward a certain audience, and that audience is a Christian audience. One of the things I noticed about PureFlix and Angel Productions and Hallmark movies, especially within the Christian scope, is they're copycats of popular culture. And not only are they copycats of popular culture, but they're bad copycats of popular culture. Schitt's Creek was very popular on streaming services. And so, Christianity made an offshoot of that. They had their own type of Schitt's Creek without the profanity and without the, written with a more modest touch. You remember the Ainsley McGregor mysteries with Candice Bure, murder mysteries, and those are dumbed down and they're toned down and they're very soft and they're very palatable and they're very safe for people to watch. Freaky Friday had something, Freaky Friday is an old movie, but then they rebooted it, and Christianity came up with their version of Freaky Friday, which was called Switched. Stranger Things was wildly popular. I watched it. My family watched it. My boys have watched it. We're not going to burn in hell. It doesn't make us bad Christians. But a lot of people struggled with Stranger Things, particularly right-wing evangelicals. So what do? They make up their own film called Sketch. And these are poorly made, pitiful attempts to keep up with popular culture, to stay relevant. And whenever Christians try to stay relevant, we know that we are not on the cutting edge. And if we will just simply talk about Jesus, if we will just simply preach the gospel, there's nothing, why can't we make a movie that's good? Why can't we make a movie that is evangelistic? The Passion of the Christ was a great movie. It made over $9 million. But when Mel Gibson made The Passion of the Christ, that's when the bells went off, and that's when the proverbial ears went up, and people realized, the movie companies realized, hey, Christians are an audience, and they're an audience that we can make money from. And Christian productions, Christian cinematography, PureFlix, Hallmark movies, all these different venues for people to watch something, they're very lucrative and they're very effective. Now, what is the danger of watching some of these productions, PureFlix Christian movies? They give us a Puritan view of the world. And you say, well, what's a Puritan view of the world? Well, the Puritan view of the world, the Puritans they had a Calvinistic viewpoint. The Puritans they had very strict morality. The Puritans had strange idiosyncrasies about sumptuary laws, like the kind of clothes you wear silk and gold. The Puritans were against the theater. The Puritans were against sporting events. The Puritans were against playing cards or parlor games. And don't ever forget that the Puritans made terrible mistakes and damage was done as it concerned their superstitious views on demonology and the witch hunts. But this is very interesting too about the Puritan view. The Puritan view of the world was the Puritans were good and the world was bad. That is exclusive. It's not inclusive. But this is interesting with the Puritans. The Puritans believed that it was the government's responsibility to enforce moral standards. It was the government's responsibility to ensure true religious worship. And it was the government's responsibility to make sure that religious worship was established and maintained. We always have to remember that we need to thank God for the separation of church and state. And these are very, very important things. And so when you immerse yourself in something like this, you begin to isolate. And something else happens to you as well. You begin to think that the world is supposed to be this way. Now, PureFlix, Hallmark, and Christian cinematography, they can actually change and rewire a consumer's brain. Watching PureFlix and Christian cinematography, Hallmark movies even, they are very addictive. And they drastically escalate our compulsion to want more of them. We want to see more of this. The more you immerse yourself in a false reality, the more that you try to create utopia. You're always looking for utopia. You're always looking for perfection. You're always looking for something that's safe. You're always looking for something that's colorful. You don't want any negativity. But you know what? The real world and life has a way of creeping its way back in. And unfortunately, the real world sometimes is ugly, but we're called to change the real world. And when we try to have a Puritan view, remember, the world is bad. Everything outside of the church is bad. When we look at things that way, we will not compel people to Christ. Hallmark movies and Christian cinematography, PureFlix, they can actually alter your romantic tastes. And they can drive a wedge between your relationships, because ladies will say, my wife doesn't act like that. Well, if all you do is watch movies about how the man is perfect, the man makes no mistake. And I just want to say this for my own part and for my wife's part, and we've discussed this. One of the reasons, particularly with Hallmark movies, that people like to watch Hallmark movies is because they like the little chicks that are in the Hallmark movies. And one of the reasons that the ladies like to watch Hallmark movies is because every man is a hunk. Every man is a hunk of burning love. Every man is educated. I don't ever see fat people on Hallmark cinematography. I don't ever see biracial people. Rarely do I ever see people, like that in different types of people, different types of ethnicity, different types of social status, different types of economical status. No, because in most of these movies, Hallmark and Christian cinematography, everybody is perfect. Everybody is educated. Everybody is well read. Everybody is the perfect weight. Everybody is the perfect size. And I'm sorry, friends, but the real world simply is not like that, because Christian movies, PureFlix, and Hallmark movies, they are full of toxic lies. Christian movies, PureFlix, and Hallmark movies can actually fuel depression. They fuel anxiety, and they leave the consumers even lonelier than they were before. Do you realize that when we watch some of these things, that they release dopamine, and dopamine works with the pleasure centers, so you find yourself wanting to watch them more and more and more and more, to be entertained, to escape the hard realities of life, because life is even hard with Christ, and sometimes we have to admit that. But remember that PureFlix and Christian cinematography, they're unnatural, they're synthetic, they're geared toward right-wing, particularly white evangelicals, and they're a cheap ripoff of popular culture. There's a term that I have come to begin to understand, and a good friend of mine told me this. He said, when you're thinking about PureFlix, and when you're thinking about Hallmark, and when you're thinking about Christian cinematography, it's almost like it's religious pornography. Now, the definition of pornography is the depiction or acts in a sensational manner, but they arouse a quick, intense, and emotional reaction. And I believe that when you watch too much of these things, I believe that when you consume yourself and you try to isolate yourself and you try to put yourself in this fantasy land all of the time, that it's very quick, it's intense, and it's an emotional reaction, but it's definitely not real. Pornography in the natural, it impacts your relationships. Pornography in the natural perpetuates racism and toxic stereotypes. Pornography in the natural, it has the ability to change the brain. And I believe that consuming these things, Hallmark movies, PureFlix, Christian cinematography, I believe it has some of the same effects as pornography has. Let's talk for a moment some of the reasons why Hallmark movies are so dangerous for those who consume them day in and day out. My wife loves Hallmark movies, and I remember there was a period of time where that was all that she would watch, and I would warn her, and we had many arguments, and we still have arguments about things like this, because she thinks I'm too hard on some of these things, and I think that she's too lenient on some of these things. But some of those arguments are okay. But she, through the years, she's begun to see some of my points, not all of them, but some of them, and there's progress that's been made there. But some of the reason that Hallmark movies are so devastating to our relationships is because they're unrealistic, and they have formulaic plots. They have formulaic casting. You say, what's that? Formulaic casting relies on star power, typecasting. Formulaic casting ensures marketability. These movies are geared and set up for marketability. They're set up to make money. They're not set up for an evangelistic thrust. They're set up to entertain the sheep. That's my point. Now, consuming Hallmark movies is an unrealistic portrayal of romance and life. And some of you, if you've been married over 3 or 4 years, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you ensconce yourself in this marshmallow world, in this false reality that these movies have the tendency to lead us down and to lead us into these comfortable, isolated places, it will give you an unrealistic portrayal of romance and life, because you'll say, my wife's not like that, my husband's like that, not like that, my family's not like that, our relationships with the outside world, they're not like like that because I'm seeing these things on television. I'm seeing these things through Christian cinematography. My Christianity's not like that. My church is not like that. My pastor's not like that. My pastor has problems. My wife has problems. I have problems. My children don't act that way all the time. My children talk back. My children are on drugs. This doesn't match up with what I see on cinematography, and it doesn't because it's not real. But there's formulaic casting and formulaic plots. One of the dangers of Hallmark cinematography, it's a comfort and escapism. Comfort and escapism within these movies, they're always the norm. One thing, we want our lives to reflect what we see in these films. We want our lives to portray and emulate what we see in these films. Let us not forget this afternoon that Christian movies or Christian entertainment is very, very lucrative financially. Financially, they're set up to make money. They're set up to entertain you. They're set up to coddle you. They're set up to cater for you, and they will alter and warp your reality, your perception of how the real world is, and even how your Christianity is as well. As I close this simple little diatribe today, because it is kind of a rant, because I'm very against these things, but I just want you to be here with me today. But as I close, Jesus isn't the problem. The gospel isn't the problem. The church isn't the problem. The church can be the problem. We could spend the rest of our lives trying to deconstruct that, but yet nevertheless, Jesus isn't the problem. The films themselves are the problem. The quality of the films is the problem. The content and the production of these films are the real problem. Remember that God has not called us to escape the world through PureFlix, Christian cinematography, Hallmark movies. God has not called us to isolate ourselves from the world, but God has called you and I to take our eyes and our minds and focus on the reality that He has set before us, and God has called us to change the world by and through the power of Jesus Christ. Thank you for listening. God bless you.